You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
A source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the province.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar and Khatib.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show today. Our guest is Mike Karim, who's the co-founder and also the former CEO of Oxford Endovascular. We have an interesting topic today, which is university spinouts. I think that's something that we see a lot of great technologies come out of, which is university labs. The question though is that how do you identify those types of companies and projects? How do you do due diligence, and then more importantly, like how do you exit it out of the university setting and raise money around it? And so Mike knows a lot about this. He's not an academic. He's actually spent quite a lot of time in industry before identifying Oxford Endovascular. So Mike, thanks so much for joining the show. How are you doing?
I'm great, Omar. It's fantastic to meet you. Thanks very much for inviting me on.
Absolutely. And maybe before we dive into the topic, give us like a little bit of your background and journey in terms of how you started in the industry, and then how did you end up identifying Oxford Endovascular and spinning it out of the university setting?
Sure, I'll give you a whistle-stop tour of that. I guess going back to when I was at university, I studied preclinical medicine. I think we have a common interest there in your history. I wanted to be a doctor, but then while I was at university, I was studying at Southampton in the UK. I became interested in how teams form, how people get together and actually produce things. I was involved in various sports. I was involved in a martial arts club, and I just saw how people get together and create things. I also had a number of friends who were older than me, but were in industry, so in the medical, pharmaceutical industry. And during some of my vacation periods, I got time to travel with them and learn beyond the academic area. And that really got me fascinated. And I started to think, could I have more of an effect on healthcare and innovation by going into industry versus remaining as a doctor working in a very small specialty? So that was sort of the initial part of my thinking. So I did preclinical medicine, then went into the pharmaceutical industry, joined a US company called Upjohn, which eventually became part of Pfizer. That gave me a really strong grounding in business and sales. In particular, I was there for about 5 years, and I got headhunted by Boston Scientific, which I'm sure most people have heard of. When I was in the UK at that time, very few doctors had actually heard of it. It was big in the US, it was growing, but it was just going direct in Europe. So it was seen as a new kid on the block. And that really got me into medical devices. I worked with a very small division at the time, urology, and it was kind of like a startup in itself. And that got me into taking my knowledge of sales into the operating room, carrying the bag, but then also with my medical background, demonstrating a number of procedures in the urogyne area, urology area. I was with Boston Scientific for about 12 years doing different roles. I became a director of 3 different divisions that were turnaround divisions. So after having grown a number of businesses, that was kind of a potential poison chalice I was given, but I was able to turn those businesses around. I think you always learn from doing something like that, being put outside of your comfort zone. I think that's how you grow your comfort zone. And while I was doing that, I was sponsored to do an MBA, and that got me interested in how small SMEs get going and also startups. So after about 12 years of Boston Scientific, I thought, okay, well, now's the time to take the plunge. And I got into the early stage company world, joined a small UK startup that had just got CE mark for a vascular technology, took that into markets in Europe, the Middle East, and Russia, interestingly. And it was at a time just before the big financial crash happened. So I learned a lot about building a business during the financial crash. Was later headhunted by a Boston-based medical device company and took that international and helped it get to market leadership outside of the US. Spent some time in the US as well later on. That company got a very big exit, which I think everyone was really proud of. Worked for another US startup that had got CE mark, a company out of California. That got an exit to Medtronic. And then that's when Oxford University approached me and said, you seem to have spent quite a bit of time in medtech. Can we ask you about this neurovascular early stage concept of a technology to treat brain aneurysms? Is there a market for it? What does it look like? Is it worth spinning out? And that's what got me involved with Oxford University at the time.
Fantastic. So, let's talk about I guess the due diligence for you as an exec. What did they have, and what boxes did they check off for you to say yeah, actually this is worth me taking risks? Because you got in at a very, very early stage, and usually at that time, when things are just in a lab, it's very hard to due diligence these things. So what's your advice to somebody who's, again, a medtech exec who's got a great track record, usually like yourself, they have a great commercial background, and they get approached by somebody in a university setting, right? So how do you due diligence a technology?
Quick commercial break for marketing leaders and sales leaders. I don't have to tell you this, but it's worth reiterating that the time clinicians have to meet with medical reps is limited. You know this and feel this. It's been a challenge for med device sellers for decades. Now, with the rising workloads and patient care demands, clinicians' times are shrinking even more. And the window for your sellers and your sales team to meet with these clinicians consists of pretty much just minutes in a busy hospital hallway. The reality is your sellers have to make every second count, or someone else will. They must be concise, they got to be efficient, and use highly relevant information to make the most out of these brief interactions. Showpad is all about focusing your sellers on the art of selling, which is about building trust and relationships. And while there's science, the Showpad solution handles the behind-the-scenes prep and follow-up work to make your team more effective. The best part is that you get insights on content and training performance so you can make strategic decisions and invest more in what works based on data. Showpad helps your sales and marketing teams spend their time in more productive, high-impact ways with a multiplying effect on your revenue results and growing your pipeline. So to learn more, go to showpad.com/State of MedTech. Now, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, it's a really good question because at such an early stage when something is conceptual, it's in a lab, it's very hard to know what exactly is going to be involved. So, there were questions they had of me to try and answer about the market. Fortunately, I had a background in neurovascular. It was one of the divisions I led when I was back at Boston Scientific. So I knew a lot of the key opinion leaders, the key players. I knew a lot of the competitor companies. This particular technology was a flow diverter concept. So this is a micro stent designed to go into the arteries in the brain and lie across the weaknesses in the blood vessel, or aneurysm, as it's known, and designed to try and cure that risk of rupture, which can lead to deaths of thousands of people. It affects one in 10 people. 1 in 50 people around the world. And so, the university, from me, they wanted to know, is there a good market for this technology? What would it take to build a business plan? I had a lot of experience of building business plans in the commercial organizations I worked for. And thirdly, they wanted to know, okay, if it all looks good, what does it take to actually spin the company out? How much money would need to be raised, etc., and then to get it going? Now, the other part of your question, okay, from my perspective, what did I want to know is, okay, how far had the technology actually been conceptualized? What differentiated it from the competitors on the market? so that you're not just bringing something which is a Me Too technology to the market. And thirdly, what would it take to actually develop the concept into something that was a commercial product? So I think it's really important to ask lots of questions around that. You won't get all of the answers because part of the process of spinning it out is to actually then get into the nuts and bolts and to try and answer that. But you need to try and tick as many of those boxes as possible. The Oxford Endovascular technology, and it wasn't called Oxford Endovascular at the time. It was just a concept in an engineering lab with two professors who were experts in their field. One a professor of engineering, and one a professor of neurovascular medicine, who was actually a world key opinion leader. So between them, they'd spent about 4 years working on this origami engineered inspired technology that was well differentiated from the competitors in that it used a laser cut frame stent essentially to be able to open up and get in the right position in the blood vessels in the brain. And that compared with basically all of the other competition, which was a woven mesh structure, which had challenges in adapting to the shape of the anatomy, getting in the right position. And that was really the sweet spot where about 30% of procedures fail. So straight away, you could see that if you could develop this technology to meet those challenges, then you would have a march on all the major competitors in the market. And, there would be doctors who use these technologies, these established technologies, that would be willing to switch, and strategics who would be very interested in the technology.
I think it's something you point out to is that when evaluating these technologies, one is like making sure that it does solve an actual clinical pain point that clinicians would use. The other side of it is, does it satisfy the criteria to be an acquisition target for a strategic, right? When you're looking at those two things within like a certain constraint of time, which one do you start with first and why?
So I think first and foremost, it really has to be, is it meeting an unmet need? That doesn't mean to say it has to be creating a new market. It could be an established market. And actually, in many ways, that's good because in terms of getting reimbursement for something, you've already shortened the timeline and you're not going to have to do a great amount of market development. But fundamentally, whatever you're looking at has to meet some sort of unmet market need that is quantifiable. And so you meet this gap that's in the market, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's interested in it. It has to be something that the end users, and in this case, neurovascular doctors, neurosurgeons, etc., have to be able to buy into so that they end up using it and the payers are willing, to pay for it, or it has to be reimbursed and easy to be able to pay for it. Without those questions answered, you're not going to get very, very far. So that first and foremost has to be the question. Now, the second part, the strategics, if you can answer that first question, you're going to have a very good chance of existing salespeople in existing strategic organizations, as they hear about the technology, as they see it being used, for example, in a clinical trial situation, they're going to be going back to those companies and telling them about it, or relating the conversations they have with key opinion leaders about the need that is potentially going to be met by this developing technology. And that's what gets the strategics interested, either because the business they have may be under threat and they've got to do something about it, or it's actually an opportunity to actually take a market leadership position in that particular space where they may be operating but may not have that position, or actually may be looking to play in that particular market. So, lots of different ways of looking at it, but fundamentally it has to meet that unmet medical need.
What about, once you've identified and done your due diligence, what's the process like in terms of when the company actually spins, quote unquote, spins out of the university? And also, how do you figure out the equity in terms of, because the university is going to want to take some amount of equity. And so I'm wondering, what's the rule of thumb here? Because that's something I have no idea, right? Or I think a lot of people don't know, which is something's founded in a university, it spins out, how much does the university get to own of it? What's reasonable and what's kind of standard versus what's excessive?
Well, I think, the term spinout is, it's an interesting one because it sort of gives the impression that it can happen quite quickly, but it's actually, there's a process behind it, and some universities are really good at it, and others are developing their processes. In the case of Oxford University, it now has a very well established spin-out process and very, very good support from the entity Oxford University Innovation, which is essentially the sort of incubator spin-out part of the organization. It's well-staffed, well-organized, and they have a very good formula for helping to get investment and also to look at the equity stake that they would take in the company. Now, that's evolved over a number of years. Back when we spun out, it was, I would say, in earlier stages. They'd had quite a bit of success, but universities like Cambridge had an even stronger track record. And when we were spinning out back in 2015, it was at a very opportune turning point because a big VC player came on the scene with a lot of support and financial resources, and that really changed things in the Oxford space. And that also allowed the innovation arm of Oxford University to really professionalize its offering and build a really good foundation around it. Now, in terms of the equity stake, if you're spinning out a company from the university, of course, there are formulas around that. There's, things that are set up, but it's really up to the founders to negotiate the best position for the company. And of course, this is all in balance because you need the support of whoever is helping you to spin out. You need the support of your initial seed investors, but you've also got to balance that with the interests of the academic founders, the interests of the university. But then you've got to look ahead and look at the interests of the future of the company. And you've got to try and get that all in balance. So, without going into specific numbers, it's a negotiation at the end of the day, like any negotiation. But, if you're becoming an executive in the company, your duty really is to the company and making sure that the company can develop and succeed. That said, you're also accounting for the interests of a whole variety of stakeholders that are in the ecosystem because you need their support. You can't do it on your own. It's a team game to work through various stages of development. So I think you have to be cognizant of that. You have to build really good relationships with the different groups, and a lot of it depends on where you are on the journey. But right at the beginning, at that seed stage, you're trying to get all the right elements in a good balance so that you've got a good platform, a good framework for then moving forward with your seed investment, developing the company, building the company, and then on to further stages of development.
You know, when it comes to like raising money, it's been tough in medtech the last few years. I mean, it's always tough, but especially the last few years, just with how the markets have been. And a lot of VCs are starting to be more focused on growth stage companies. Unfortunately, if we look at the last couple of years in terms of evaluating venture capital as an asset class, it's performed very, very, very badly, like really bad. And so to the point that I think a lot of venture is focused more on like revenue generating growth stage companies. So at that level, when it comes to university spinouts and raising money, where are these investors? What does that investor look like? Where do they spend time? How do you find them? And then what exactly are you pitching them?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right, Omar. The last few years in particular have been extremely challenging. I mean, if we go back to when we spun out Oxford Endovascular, it was back in 2015, and it was challenging then as well. Of course, we've had different global events take place in between, whether that's COVID or various conflicts or changes of government, etc. And all of these geopolitical and other factors play a part in what's going on. I mean, in Europe, we've had regulatory change, moving to the medical device regulation from the medical device directive. And that has been a whole upheaval in Europe, and it's caused a big drive for medtech companies having to be more focused on the US earlier on and working through an FDA process. But, the last few years particularly difficult, and what we've seen, as you quite rightly pointed out, is investors becoming more risk averse, looking to come in at a later and later stage, looking for more evidence. And that's, where it may have been prior to first in human, it then became first in human, and then actually pivotal clinical trial. And then even later, okay, you've got to show commercial traction in the US, so real market traction for maybe a few years. But, a lot of that depends on what type of company, what type of technology you have. For higher classes of devices, and class 3 devices in particular, it certainly has become later and later. And a lot of people, when you talk to CEOs who are fundraising, and particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, you'd hear people say, well, there just isn't enough money out there. Well, the fact of the matter is there is money, but you've got to work out how to access it. And what has happened is that investment companies have held on to their money more and wanted to support existing companies more, but they've still got the money. The money is still there. So for the right opportunity, new lead investors are prepared to come in. But the way that you sell your story has just been harder. So yeah, you've got to go the extra mile. You've got to make the extra effort. And it's not just about the technology. Of course, it's when you're raising capital, it's about the team. It's about, yes, it's about the CEO, but it's also about the wider team and the belief in that team of what they can do. So, more and more investors are looking for the detail behind the story. You've got to attract that interest initially, but when I'm advising a lot of people about fundraising, I always say when you do your first pitches to investors, you're actually buying more time to go through in more detail about the rest of the story. So, we worked through 4 fundraisers since 2015. We worked through the COVID period. And at that time, we were fundraising as well, at a time when you couldn't travel to fundraise, and we had to look at other sources of getting investment in. We were very fortunate in also winning some grants. So we got some Horizon grants from Europe. We won a COVID-19 rescue instrument, and we also won an Innovate grant in the UK. And I think it's adapting your story. It's adapting to the different types of investors that are looking at you, and maybe it's sometimes winning some of those things to bridge the gap. So yes, whilst it's become harder and harder, the way I always looked at it is, well, if it's harder for us, it's harder for everyone. And, because of that, if you can differentiate yourselves more, maybe you're going to get a larger slice of the money that's harder to get. So, I think you learn a lot through harder times, you polish your skills, and that, stands you in good stead for later rounds. When you have to raise even more money, your track record speaks for itself.
When it comes to, I guess, increasing your chances of luck with investors, outside of, let's say, just cold outreach, were there certain events or conferences that you would seek to attend? Because again, like, given being an early stage company, aside from like very limited on time, you're also limited on resources. You have to be very specific as to what you're going to attend and why. So were there any conferences or events that you personally found value in attending?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and a lot of this depends on the type of investment you're going for. But if it's early preclinical, pre-commercial stage, you're going to be looking at different types of investors. So some may be high net worth individuals, some may be family offices, and some may be VC funds who are prepared to come in earlier stage. So you have to sort of break that down, look at the different types of organizations who like to fund or are able to fund at different stages. And then you have to look at, well, how do I get to meet these people? Now, if you've got a good network, if you've built that up over time, some of them are by personal introductions. But then, of course, you have to be attending certain key events where these people are. So, if you're in the UK or in Europe, there are various bio networking events. We as an organization in Oxford were members of the Oxford Bio Network, which actually had a national reach, but had some very good, affordable networking events and continues to do so. They also run competitions for startups. So again, entering competitions gives you a profile in front of different investors. Some of those investors may be on judging panels, and if you get through those, even if you don't win, you get the exposure to them. So, I would say look for some of those events that are local to you. But then, of course, you have to be prepared to go abroad and, meet investors, whether that's across Europe or in the US. And some of the things we found particularly helpful in the US, for example, the Life Science Integrates events, the LSI events have been extremely helpful. They may cost a little bit more, but I think you get value in terms of the profiling you get, the types of investors. And then also, often some of these events, they'll video your pitches, and those can then go out afterwards on social media. So whilst you're pitching, you may not get hundreds in the audience, you may get tens or a little bit more, but the audience you can attract afterwards on social media, which has obviously exploded in the last few years, that's invaluable. You can also get access to interviews about your technology, about your company, or your approach. So, those are particularly helpful. The other thing that was really helpful for us was a very sophisticated competition, which was the MedTech Innovator competition, which is a US organization, but they have various different global events. So they had a European event, they also have an Asia Pacific event, and a US event. And they vet you and you go through various stages, some of which are great coaching opportunities on how to pitch, and you get in front of investors in a safe environment where, you can make some mistakes, learn from them, get the feedback. And as you go through the rounds of the competition, you build up your capability, you become more polished, you hone your skills. And we were very fortunate. We went right the way through to the finals, which were in Boston at the AdvaMed conference. And we won Best MedTech Video for the company, which again in itself gave us a great profile. We got the opportunity to build a 1-minute video, and that in itself is a whole learning experience. You learn how to be concise with your sales pitch, your elevator pitch, what you say about the company, and you learn how to produce something like that. And it takes a lot longer than one would think. In fact, it's a lot harder to do something in 1 minute than it is in 30 minutes. I often feel so. That gave us a great profile, and really built the case for later stage investors who saw us on a global stage. So lots of different ways that you can do that, and obviously with the advent of Zoom and Teams and so on, now you can pitch to people from sitting behind your desk at home, talking as we are now. So we went right from the stage where you had to jump on a plane, get on a train, go somewhere, to pitch. It took a whole day basically to get to somewhere. Now you can be pitching on 3 different continents in the same day, across different time zones. So, there are some amazing events to enable you to do that.
Yeah, I think it's having a mix between, even though my agency is focused very much on helping companies raise investor awareness and get commercial traction using social media and email. I think a mix of these is probably the right approach. I don't think it's right for somebody to say, oh, we're only going to do social media or we're only going to do events.
Yep.
Because of how sophisticated buyers are and investors, you just have to do all of them. And I think just have like a good mix. I'm wondering, when you look at past university spinouts, if you have an example, please feel free to share it. But what are some cases where you've seen it go very wrong? What were some bad decisions you've seen in other examples where you would advise people to be careful not to do?
I think when you're looking at a technology that's a potential to be spun out, I think it goes back to make sure there really is that market need. I've seen a number of ideas, technologies spin out, and there may be a need, but the ability to pay for it may not be there. And sometimes founders don't realize the importance of how long market development takes. For example, to get reimbursement codes for a technology that just is not reimbursed, that can add another 5 years to the journey to get anywhere near commercialization, or even longer. So I would say, when doing the due diligence, work out what it needs to do that market development, and that's not saying you shouldn't do it, but just factor that into your due diligence. And if you don't have experience of market development or working out how to get payers on board, how to work out how to get reimbursement codes, talk to people who've done that before. Get some good advisors. And it is possible to get advice from people without having to pay for it. People are often really keen to help you because they know if they can help you make a success of something, maybe they'll become a non-executive advisor at some stage in the development of that company. So I've seen issues like that. I've seen issues where people haven't really understood what's involved in building the business plan and what's involved in building out a team and just how long it takes and what you have to pay for people. I think what's really important is when you build the business plan is really to build it from bottom up. So look at all of the ingredients that will go into something month by month over 1, 2, and 3 years. Speak to financial experts to make sure you're not missing any elements. I see a lot of people who come and ask for advice, and they say, yeah, I've got a business plan and I've got a deck. And I say, okay, all right, well, you've built out your timeline and you've got your numbers, but where did those numbers actually come from? And they said, well, we spoke to some other companies that have done it, and this is what we think it roughly is. And I say, well, okay, be really careful, because you might raise the money early on, but then in a few months you might actually need a few million more than what you thought you've needed. So, again, be very, very careful about that. And even when you've done that, you always need to account for the unknown. How many people expected that there would be a global pandemic, and what would that, do to your business plan? So you can't always predict these things. And sometimes the craziest things that nobody's thought of are actually quite possible. And in this day and age, there's a lot of volatility. There's, geopolitical situations going on. There's climate change going on. Things can happen which can disrupt you. So within your business plan, always try and have a contingency in there, and take on extra money if if it's available. Take it on, but build that in as a contingency. And when you're talking to investors,
is your advice essentially take money when you don't need it?
Yeah, because when you think you don't need it, maybe just when you do need it, it may be just around the corner. So always take money when it's available. Try not to underestimate what you may need. Build a contingency in, and then I think investors will expect that. If you say this is exactly what I need, but I haven't got a contingency, I think investors will probe you on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that it's safe to say, especially compared to SaaS, in med device, it just takes a lot of money to take these products to market. So you are going to end up needing to raise later. And so your advice essentially is, if it's available to you that at that point, just take it then. And I would imagine that during those times that you're going to have much more favorable terms in terms of valuation and everything, right? Versus later on when you need it and people can smell the desperation, then that's when, your current investors can get diluted. Your valuation could be rocked a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I would say is that when you're working on a round, you're not just working on that round, you're actually working on the next one, because by the time you've completed it, you will be working on the next one. So, really start to tee up that next round and start to tee up the types of investors that you will need later on, even if it's a few years ahead, because you're always building relationships with those groups. They're getting to know you. They're watching the journey. So when you need to be actually working on that later fundraise, you want to be going to people that you've built a good relationship with, people who have got to know you, people who trust you, believe in you, and you've built up that rapport with, and you can go back to and fill them in on how the story has developed, the progress you've been made, the milestones that you've met. So I think one of the things I always tried to do, when you asked about events and pitching and so on, it's also those one-on-one discussions that you set up at these conferences or these online events that are really important. And so it's really important to plan for those, to target for those. Again, I've seen people go to events and, maybe they don't even plan for those one-to-one meetings, and they'll figure, I'll meet people when I'm there. But you actually have to plan for these weeks in advance. As soon as the partnering opens, you need to be ready with your dialogue, your information, you're reaching out to people on an individual basis, so that when you're at the event, you've got a whole load of these officially lined up, but then you'll also take advantage of the opportune one. So you have to have a strategy for that going into the events. And then when you meet these people, obviously have your elevator pitch, your talk track, know where they are coming from, because effectively they're a customer, that you are selling to. So do research on their background, where they're at within their investment cycle, what are they investing in? What are they interested in? What is their background as a person, as an investor? All of those important things that go into normal sales are really important in your investment cycle. So, build for the future, not just what you're working on in the here and now.
No, that makes complete. Excuse me, that makes complete sense. And I think that what's interesting is, the timing that it takes in terms of identifying a really interesting university project. And that's something else I was gonna ask you about is like, in your case, it was great because they found you. But if you're, let's say, maybe not an exec, let's say even an investor, and you're searching for these university-like projects, the only place that I can think of that you might find it is if you go to a society conference and you go to the abstract section and look at the abstracts. But I wonder is there a more efficient way to look these kind of companies up?
So I think, that's certainly a really important way to do it. So yes, go to the industry conferences, go to, the medical conferences if it's medical that you're interested in, but then, also go to some of the local events. So if there's a university in London or is it in Boston or New York or wherever it is, but go to some of the local tech type of events that are going on, and you'll meet a lot of people who are working on things, a lot of the academics behind the scenes. You'll also meet the people who work for the arms that help to spin the companies out. You'll meet them at these events where, they're networking. You'll talk to them. Sometimes you'll see them present, but sometimes you'll just meet them over a coffee or drink, and you'll get talking, and you'll pick up on things that are in the pipeline, but are, maybe 2 or 3 years away. And that's actually where you want to be spotting them, not when they're trying to get out and, things are a little more challenged. If you can catch them early on, then you can learn about the journey of them early on. So, for example, I'm looking at some opportunities in the north of the UK at the moment that are embedded within a few universities. I'm giving some advice on some of those, but I'm also helping some investors to understand some of those opportunities at a much earlier stage as well. So, there are different ways of doing that research, and as you get to know, some of the bio escalators, for example, the innovation hubs, you get to know the people who are working on these things. Entrepreneurs in residence are a great source of information because they're usually seeing a lot of these things. They're advising a lot of these academics and innovators within the different university groups. So, get to know them as well.
Fantastic. Well, Mike, really appreciate you coming on the show and spending some time with us. Next year, are you gonna be headed to Dana Point next year by any chance for LSI, or do you have any conference plans for next year yet?
Yeah, I'll be looking to head to Dana Point. MedTech Innovator also has a number of things going on that I'll be getting involved with as well. But there are so many good events to go to, and a lot of them are also online as well. So pretty much every month I'm involved in something. I'm at something coming up at Imperial College and University College London, some panels that are going on over the next few weeks as well, leading up to Christmas. So it's always an active environment.
Perfect. Well, fantastic. Well, Mike, we appreciate you coming on the show and spending some time with us. For those who are listening, go give Mike a follow on LinkedIn. And as always, we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.